Good morning. Thank you for joining us today for October's Webinar Wednesday. And today we are looking at the pros and cons of BS9999. For those of you who haven't joined us before, my name's Katie. I look after the digital side here at CABE, and I'll be the moderator and just helping you along this morning. So how do you get involved? It's an interactive session, and you can send us any questions that you have. I know there's some already come in so far this morning. So on the right-hand side, you'll see a little question pane. So again, anything...
It's Kevin speaking. Sorry, Katie, the reason I'm overriding at the moment is I've lost your audio. I'm not entirely sure whether the audience have as well. Can you just confirm to me, Katie, that you can hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'll carry on then because I'm not sure what's happened to your audio at that point. If you want to interact with us today, then there is a question panel in the desktop panel that's on the right-hand side of the screen. Simply type in a question and we'll pick it up as we go. And thank you to those of you already confirming that you can hear us and actually everything's all right from your end. So that's always positive. Good. One other thing we'd like to do just to test the question panel today, which we haven't done before, we're aware that sometimes our audience is out there listening as a group, and although we know how many people have registered, we don't know how many actual people listen as a group. So if you are listening with others, colleagues, friends, whatever, perhaps you could just put into the question panel now how many of you are actually sat around a monitor looking at the webinar. It just gives us a better feel of the actual size of the audience, which we can't always be 100% sure of. Okay, right, so for those of you who aren't aware, I'm Kevin Blunden, Deputy Chief Executive here at CABE, and I'm going to be taking you through some of the issues around BS9999 at the moment. So, I am going to ask to kick off some questions that will ask you to input some information, just to get a feel of where you are. So we're going to start with three quick questions. The first of those is about... Something's gone wrong with my polls as well. Right, first question, how would you use BS9999? So really on this one you're answering whether you're looking at it from a designer's point of view, from a developer's point of view, as a fire consultant, as someone working in building control, or for some other aspect, and I'm just letting people vote and get a fair percentage of you voting through that so I can see where the audience is sitting. Okay, and I'm just going to close that poll off in just a couple more seconds. Okay. Right, so to let you see the results of that poll, which hopefully are now about to appear on your screen, although my screen is telling me that I've shared the results with you. I'm not entirely sure that's what you're seeing. Oh yes, you are, good. So as you can see from that, large percentage of you watching today are working in building control, and then a good chunk, 13%, as designers, some fire consultants, and some others. So hopefully we can pitch this in the right sort of place to try and help you with that. I'm going to move on to the second question then, which is which of the three approaches that are generally used do you tend to use most often? So is it approved document B and the guidance that goes with that, BS9999, and I suppose within that bracket we would include BS9991 as well, or a fire engineered type approach? So again, you're all voting quite rapidly on this one, so I'll only give this a few more seconds, and I'll close that off now because I think most people have responded, and again share that result with you. And overwhelmingly there, people are telling me that the approach they tend to use most often is approved document B, the sort of default setting given to us by the building regulations, which I've got to be honest, from a personal perspective, from the feedback I see on a sort of a day-to-day basis, is quite common. I'm not overly surprised by that one. And then we'll run to the third of the three questions, just to get an idea of roughly how many projects you've maybe used 9999 on in the last 12 months. just to get a feel for where that's sitting. Okay. Right, and I'll share the results of that one with you. And although there are maybe 18% of you who've used them on over 10 projects in the last 12 months, the bulk of the audience today maybe either hasn't used 9999 or has used them on less than 10 projects. So actually, that again sort of reflects perhaps where I thought things were before we moved forward. So with a bit of luck now, you're back to seeing my slides from the polls, having set a sort of context as to where we are as an audience. So, 9999, it's been with us now for quite a long while. In fact, as a British standard, it's getting quite ancient because British standards are usually reviewed on a sort of 5-year basis. And we are actually on the cusp of a brand new 9999. The revised version went out to a consultation to the industry in May of this year. That's closed. I understand that the British Standards Institute had somewhere in the region of 6,000 responses to that consultation, or 6,000 points made. So they're collating those, adjusting, and then hope to have the new BS9999 with us by the end of this year. The basic principles, or a lot of the basic principles, will remain the same, but there will be some changes to how the standard actually works. So I suppose, you know, we ought to set the context now of what is BS9999 about. And it is intended to give us a more flexible approach to fire safety design than perhaps the slightly prescripted end of ADB. And I think the headline things that people tend to pick up are things like extended travel distances and variations in things like exit widths. And those, if you like, can be some of the headline benefits of using a 9999 approach. But obviously with that, there's a bit more input needed, a bit more thought into the design, quite a bit more actual explanation and detail going on in terms of some of the bits and pieces, particularly around the management side of things. So we'll look at those as we go through. So there does seem to be an element of 9999 isn't being used, and there is a question as to, well, maybe why is that? And some of that, I think, is driven by you know, our normal reluctance to use something new. But there is an element that there are concerns that 9999 appears on the surface to be taking a more risk-based approach than we're actually used to. And what I would tend to say to people, to be honest, is that actually the philosophy, the thinking, the strategy behind the provisions within this standard are exactly the same as we see in all the other standards we use, whether it's ADB, whether it's HTM, whether it's Building Bulletin 100, which is also being revised at the moment. It is about a risk-assessed approach, but all that happens in 9999 perhaps is you see a bit more of that risk assessment going on. With Approved Document B, the same assessment has gone on, but what's happened is a nice user-friendly front end has gone onto it. So in Approved Document B, we're used to dealing with categorizing properties in terms of purpose groups. Behind that, actually, there's the same risk assessment that we see in 9999, that within a purpose group that might say office in ADB, in 9999 it just breaks it down into what sort of people do we get in that environment, what's their awareness of their surroundings, what are the potential risks in terms of fuel sources and ignition sources in an office environment, and how big is the fire going to get. So we just see a bit more information in 9999. The same stuff is there in ADB, perhaps just hidden a bit. And there is a concern that perhaps within 9999 there is more of a focus on active measures. There is a focus on looking at the level of detection and alarm systems to motivate people to leave in relation to a fire. And certainly with 9999 as it stands at present, there is a much greater reliance on the management system in the property to get towards a safe solution. Now, the management aspect, because certain things within the current standard are in some respects almost unachievable, The management is one of the major revisions in the new standard that we'll see come out later in this year. So we have three basic approaches. We have the general Part B approach, we have, if you like, the advanced approach that we get in 9999, and we get a fire safety engineering solution. And other standards such as the HTM and the Building 100 for schools and the like tend to fit into that progression somewhere mainly in the sort of Part B category with an edge towards maybe 9999 when you look at things like fire code, because they are a bit more specific about how the premises is being used. But they are still a fairly simplistic sort of approach. And again, even though 9999 is a very good tool, it's not the right tool for something like a healthcare premises or possibly even a school. So the idea is that it does give us more flexibility in design. It is a prescriptive guide, it does have limits to what you can do, but there is more flexibility for the designer in using 9999, and as a result of that it can achieve a workable solution in a situation where the simplistic guidance in ADB, which at the end of the day is intended for very simplistic properties, might not give us that flexibility. So there is an element of getting a balanced solution considering an awful lot of factors, and 9999 as ADB is concerned primarily with life safety and not property protection or business continuity, but some of the things we build in might have a benefit in that respect to the end user and the owner. I think one of the things that I tend to think people should be considering at the moment is if 9999 gives us this flexibility and the highlight points of extended travel distances and changes to exit widths and the like, because we're trading something else off, we're getting people motivated to move quicker, we've got a better level of detection. Perhaps the question should be asked, if somebody is using an ADB approach but can't meet the requirements, for instance in terms of travel distance, should ADB still being used as a tool to say, okay, this is what ADB says, it says your travel distance is 18 meters, you can't quite give me that, you can only give me 20, what are you going to give me in exchange? That whole process of you can't do that, what are you going to give me in exchange, actually is the philosophy behind 9999. And so the question should be, should we be doing that degree of flexibility to ADB? And I think we still do. There are obviously variations to any standard, but at least we have a signpost now of what sort of thing we should look at to trade off if we start looking at what we're being offered from a 9999 perspective. Okay. So I think one of the issues, particularly as the standard stands at the moment, is that what you get from BS9999 approach is a more bespoke solution to the end use. There is more consideration of the fire safety plan, or as a lot of people would term it, if you like, the upfront risk assessment, design stage risk assessment. So understanding how the building is actually going to be used, how it's actually going to be managed, is fairly critical to getting the right solution under 9999. So it can mean where all of those factors are very clear at the outset, you can get to a very good solution that works for that particular use. But what it's not so good at is the other side of that equation, when you're looking at a speculative build that hasn't got an end user or a specific end use in mind, and therefore maybe people tend to want to use the sort of belt and braces approach that we get with ADB that errs on the side of caution, which does allow the end user much more flexibility in how they actually use the premises going forward. And as a result, I suppose that's one of the reasons that we don't tend to see more designs to 9999, because either you need to know a lot more about how the building is going to be used and operated to get the 9999 design right, or you end up at design stage making some assumptions about how it's going to be used that potentially will then restrict the end user in what they can do within the property. So it can make it quite a bit more difficult then to adjust later on. And the other problem is that with the 9999 approach, because it is more bespoke, should something change later on, it does tend to put an awful lot of emphasis on the risk assessment and the responsibilities of the responsible person in legislation to make sure that the safety is continued and updated and changed and maintains a level of safety. So there isn't perhaps as much flexibility as how you use and operate the building going forward. Okay, I'm just going to have a quick look through the questions. I've created a monster because asking people to tell me how many people there were means I've got a much longer list of questions than I would normally have. The first question on this did come in really early from Peter, who said, do people find that designers often tend to try and mix ADB and BS99 if advantageous to them? You will always try and get people who try and pick the best bits and cherry pick from different standards. Theoretically, once you've chosen which standard you are using, that is the one you use all the way through. So you shouldn't pick and mix between 9999 and ADB, because 9999 is an holistic approach. The means of escape bit works because the fire separation bit and the fire compartmentation bit work alongside it. So although the bulk of what you see in terms of the bits that would cover, I suppose, building regulations B2 through to B5 looks very similar in most of these standards, there are subtle changes which rely on this interaction and working as a whole package. So you should never really mix ADB and 9999 or any other standard. I do know people will tend to pick up on some things that might look more transferable, like different floor space factors for working out occupancy and things of that sort, but generally you should stick to one guide and work it all the way through. That in itself does get problematical. Some of you may have come across some changes to ADB a couple of years ago in terms of things like surface spread of flame and some thermoplastic roof lights or lighting stuff, which changed very subtly, having followed some research and some testing. Other standards that obviously were published before that testing and not renewed until afterwards actually ended up meaning that BS9999 references were referring to older research. And do you then bring forward the new stuff, or do you leave it? The safest approach is to use one document all the way through. Okay. Right, and then somebody is commenting on the latter points I was making there, basically saying that their experience is that when a building is designed and built for a particular client use, how it's used when it's occupied isn't necessarily what was originally considered. And I think there is an element that, yes, we find that nothing's ever fully anticipated. How the building is used will change subtly, which does put the onus back on the occupier for their risk assessment. But it's absolutely critical that all of the design assumptions, all of the fire safety solution decisions are passed on to the end user. So the big topic at the moment out in the industry is Regulation 38 under the building regs, which is all about passing on that fire safety information to the end user so that they can effectively do their risk assessment. And it is absolutely critical that they fully understand how the building's been designed, how it was intended to be used, so that they can appreciate perhaps how they are restricted or what they can do within their premises. So that transfer of information is absolutely fundamental at that point. Okay. Some of the other things that we do see within 9999, and this is potentially what the new table will look like in the standard, is that it is quite clear to the user that it's taking a more scientific approach than is obvious in ADB. As I said before, it's the same stuff that backs up all of these documents. But one of the things we consider in the fire scenario, and we're doing our profile of risk, is the speed of development of the fire. And generally within 9999 it categorizes fires as slow, medium, fast or ultra fast, and the current standard gives some examples of what that might be. The new version, we're hoping, will have an extra sort of typical example column on the end to make it a little bit more real in terms of what these premises might actually mean. But where it gets critical in 9999 is that having identified that what's in the property may cause something like an ultra-fast fire or a fast fire, that in turn will require us to have a good level of understanding or a good level of management in the premises, and in some circumstances with some types of risk, particularly sleeping risk, we just might have to design out the ultra fast fire. Now in practice, if you've got those materials there, the only way to restrict that fire growth is then to put in something like a suppression system, in which case you can assume that it's one step lower, so an ultra fast fire would become a fast fire. So as I say, one of the issues then that is, if you haven't got an end user in mind, you haven't got a particular level of management in mind, it does become more difficult to use 9999. You can use it, but as a designer you'll be making some assumptions about how the premises is going to be run, what its content's going to be, what the use of each area is going to be, and that will lead to a whole load of assumptions. And when it comes to looking at the risk profile of a building under 9999, what you look at is the people bit, and it tends to be, are they awake, are they likely to be asleep, are they familiar with their surroundings, are they going to need assistance to get out? And then you look at the fire bit, the bit we just looked at, the speed of developing the fire, to give you a profile of the potential risk. Now, if you don't know all of the people bit, or you don't know what the materials are going to be, then it can be difficult to know which level of risk you're actually looking at, and you'll make assumptions that later might restrict the use of the building. And similarly, part of the risk profile means that certain high risks need a really good level of management, and if you can't guarantee that at design stage and you have to take a middle of a road type approach, you might have to make sure that you design out those risks altogether. So it is ideal if you have a bespoke sort of situation. So what else are we looking at? As I say, you can end up with this issue at the end where, having designed what is a fairly bespoke solution based on the people, the fire load, the level of management, subsequent changes to any of that can lead to a potentially unsafe situation. And that can be very difficult to manage for those responsible for the building going forward. I think it's been identified that one of the issues with the current BS9999 is the way it looks at the management process. It breaks management down into about 9 or 10 different aspects, look at what's done in each of those aspects, and decides what level of response we need in those situations. And for most things, it's about how proactive the management happened to be. Going forward, the new 9999 will revise that approach and look at a couple of levels of management, following very much the principles of a currently public available specification produced by BSI, PAS 7, which sets down the sort of management principles and actually fits much better and perhaps will be a little bit easier to use as part of the 9999 approach. So it might be easier going forward. Okay, so what is 9999 all about? Well, this is basically it. If you like, this is our Part B fire timeline. So we get the fire start, which in an awful lot of instances is going to be a slowish, smouldering fire. And then there's a delay period until somebody discovers that fire or a detector goes off. The alarm is then raised by one form or another, whether it's somebody actually physically going and running and breaking a break glass point, or whether it's by a detection system setting off the alarm. And then you get that period of pause when the people in the building aren't sure whether it's a fire alarm or not, aren't sure whether it's a drill, aren't sure whether they need to be doing anything. And there can be quite a considerable delay before people are motivated to actually start their escape. And then we get, if you like, the escape phase, which is the bit where they're actually moving towards an exit. So what we hear about 9999 is a lot that it's extending travel distances, narrowing widths of doorways. What 9999 is really doing is gaining us additional time. So one of the basic principles that we can look at is looking at this front end of that evacuation business. If we can speed up the discovery and the alarm, then actually that saves us time. So automatic fire detection throughout, linked to the alarm system, can speed up that process. If we can then look at having the sort of alarm that actually motivates people to move, so maybe a voice alarm system that says there is a fire, please leave by either the nearest available exit or the next exit in the northwest corner or whatever might be appropriate for the audience, that can motivate people to move that much quicker, and again that can save us time. Now what we could do with that time is we'll just say, well, we'll keep our escape phase exactly the same as it is at the moment, and then all we've got is an increased margin of safety to get out of the building, and we might be happy just to live with that and have a very safe building. But obviously what the principle of double line is doing is saying, if we've gained this time, what can we do in that time? And the answer to that question is we can move further towards an escape, or we can take longer to negotiate an exit. So those are some of the principles of how we start to gain under double line. Well, I'm just going to see if I can pick up any other questions. There's one there I'm fairly sure has recently come in. What's the difference between double 999 and double 991? Right, BS9991 is the standard that now deals with residential accommodation. When BS99 was first introduced in 2008, we didn't have a 9991. So BS9999 also dealt with some residential scenarios. 9991 was introduced in 2011 and updated in 2015 and now deals with residential. So BS9999, when it comes out as the revised version at the end of this year, will not be dealing with residential properties. There'll be some explanation in the standard as to which standard to use on things like mixed use, but 9991 is the residential equivalent of 9999, which is the commercial side. Okay. Right. So, as I say, one of the things with BS9999 is this perception that you can have extended travel distances and that you can have narrower exits. And that is generally true if you start putting the right compensating features in, like the right alarm system, the right warning, maybe even looking at higher ceiling heights. You can start to play with things like travel distances. So this is perception that you end up with something better. But it is just worth pointing out that the starting point isn't always better. So if you take ADB and look at a shop in terms of travel distance, ADB says single direction with no choice of exit 18 meters, two direction 45. Oh, my second slide's gone slightly adrift. The second bit there, where it says BS9999B3, it should say single direction 40 meters, 16 meters, two direction 40 meters. So actually the starting point is less than ADB. ADB for a restaurant, again, we're 18 and 45, but for BS9999, it's 20 and 50. So again, that's slightly to the plus. But there is a clause in the guidance in 9999 that says if it's a premises where you may be consuming alcohol, you take off a quarter of that travel distance. So actually the starting point comes down to 15 and 37.5. So for both of those instances, really, although the headline is you can get longer travel distances using 9999, the starting point may well be less than you could have in ADB. Now, to be fair, the concept of taking off 25% if you may have been consuming alcohol applies to somebody in a bar or a restaurant, whether their building was designed to ADB or 9999. It's just only clear in 9999 you make that allowance. But you could argue that if you're looking at it sensibly under ADB, you'd do the same sort of thing. So why are we not using 9999? Well, some of it is about the familiarity of the document and the way the information is set up. A lot of our standards, ADB, Building Goods 100, HTM, a lot of the tables that you see within the content of the standards are produced in exactly the same sort of way. A lot of the sketches, to be perfectly honest, are incredibly identical. When you get to 9999, actually some of that data is represented in a different way. So the table for staircase widths actually from the start starts saying calculating the width of the staircase in millimeters per person. And as a result, to do an assessment under 9999, the first thing you're going to need is a calculator to start calculating up some things. So that can, the different format, the way the information is presented being something different than we're used to, can be confusing and can mean that people actually are reluctant to carry on and use it. Because although it's explained and the philosophy explained, the tables can look different because they're set out in a different way from the ones that we're used to. And there is quite a lot within the standard where you need to understand and apply the principles. And perhaps in the existing 9999, and one of the things that is slightly better in the proposed version, is sometimes explaining what is a compensating feature and what are we actually expecting. So when we're looking at something in terms of an alarm system that motivates people to move quicker, clarifying exactly what that might mean. So there is an element of trying to work out exactly, you know, what the philosophy is behind, which is clearer, I think, in the revised version that's moving forward. Okay, and as I say, you have to take a fully holistic approach. You have to look at all the issues within 9999 and use the whole standard, but it is a combination of all of the issues that you consider that gets you to a safe solution. And so people need to appreciate that changing any one of these elements will have a knock-on effect on all of the others. Okay, I'm just trying to look at it in terms of a couple of other comments and questions that have come in. Somebody said, the travel distance in a small hotel I recently looked at was less with 9999 than ADB, and there was no benefit for an L1 alarm because it was required as a basic requirement. Also, atriums sometimes are less onerous designed under ADB. And yes, I think there is an element that you will find some circumstances where you don't gain the headline benefits. You can still look at it as an approach, as a way of moving forward, but I think that sort of hits at one of the main reluctances to use this standard, is that people only want to use a more complicated standard if they can see that there's a definite benefit to their client. And as a designer, most designers will say, well, yeah, I could use that approach. It will let me gain X, Y, or Z, and that's worth doing if it's going to save the client money either in the build or in the long-term operation of the building. And there is an element with any designer that they'll have to do a balancing act at design stage to say to the client, well, this might save you in the build because you're getting slightly longer travel distances, but in the long term it's going to cost you because you're going to have to do X, Y, and Z to manage or run the property effectively. So in reality, there will always be, in the designer's mind, a look at and the pros and cons. And that's why, to a certain extent, the default tends to be, let's go to ADB. The other side of that coin, I think, is that 9999 is a slightly more advanced approach. It is considering things in a little bit more detail. It's not quite as rounded as ADB, if you like. So actually, one of the main reasons to use 9999 is that ADB might not be fit for purpose for the building you're looking at, because ultimately, although we use it as a default standard and we have a guidance document for commercial buildings, it is still only meant for simplistic designs. And once you get something that doesn't meet that simplistic norm, it might be that actually using 9999 or maybe even moving towards a fire engineer approach might be the more appropriate measure to take. And I'm just picking up on the last bit of that comment that says atriums can sometimes be less onerous if designed under ADB. That might be the case, but ADB isn't a particularly good tool for a complex building that might include an atrium. And it might well be that if you follow the basic guides, you tick the boxes. But actually, when you're looking at the fire strategy, the fire safety plan, and the provisions you're putting in the building, once you've got an atrium, you might be better off at looking at a different standard to get the right level of safety. Somebody said here the approved document tends to a negative liability. That's why it's more commonly used. I think what we're referring to there is basically the legal status of an approved document, where there is this legal presumption that if you follow the guidance in the approved document, you are deemed to comply and therefore safe from any prosecution or enforcement later on. It can be argued that because the British Standard doesn't have that same legal status as an approved document, that same doesn't apply. Having said that, I would feel it's highly unlikely that if somebody was taken to court on a prosecution and their defence was, I've designed the building fully to the relevant British standard, I can't see that somebody would be able to justify that they hadn't actually done an adequate fire safety design. And then I think one that comes from the heart of a lot of us, why am I not using 9999? Because it costs me over £100 to buy a copy, whereas ADB is downloaded for free. And we and other parts of the industry have made numerous representations to the government that where something is being quoted as a design tool or what's a second tier of reference documents, so it's referred to in the British Standard as in ADB as an alternative approach, that it perhaps should be freely available. And I don't know if any of you took part in the consultation to BS9999 earlier this year, the new version, but BSI are so protective of their standards, you couldn't download a whole consultation document to then comment on. You had to do it and look at it a section at a time, and that purely is to protect their copyright. Now, to be fair to BSI, British standards are incredibly expensive to produce. You have to get panels of experts sit down for an awful long time. There has to be research feed into the conclusions, and they have to try and recoup those costs. But I do agree with you that sometimes actually the cost of buying a standard and keeping up to date with the standards can be a little prohibitive. Right. One of the other reasons that we might not use 9999 is it's not necessarily the right standard. So for hospitals and healthcare premises where we tend to look at a progressive horizontal evacuation type approach, BS9999 doesn't really address it. For schools, again, because you have a different profile of people, a different category of risk, Building Bulletin 100 is the primary tool for designing schools. Now, Building Bulletin 100 has again been out for a recent consultation, and we will be looking at a new document shortly. The main emphasis of those revisions is to take out the property protection bits that are currently within BB 100. Prisons, again, it's a sort of very akin to hospitals and healthcare, to be honest, a sort of a managed horizontal progression from a fire. So again, not really suitable to 9999. And once you get to more complicated buildings, we have to know the limit. And I think this is the trick. If it's too complicated for ADB, then should we look at 9999, or actually are we going to get even more benefit from going from a fully fire engineered approach? And I think again one of the reasons we don't see so many 9999 approaches is because having made that leap, people then say, well, I'll go the full I'll get for a full engineered approach by a consultant. They'll come up with a solution that ultimately is going to save the client money. And then it's not a great standard to try and apply to an existing building when you're doing a refurbishment or an alteration or an extension. If the original design wasn't to 9999, because ultimately it's this mix and match business again. But that does lead us to one of the big issues in the industry at the moment. How do you know which standard was used when your building was actually designed? And again, that's part of the reason for passing the information on to the actual user of the premises, so they hold all of that. Right. As I mentioned earlier on, the current British standard is quite onerous in terms of management. So the approach in the intended approach in the new version that will come out will reflect the principles of this publicly available specification 7. Picking up on the same comment before, publicly available specifications are, if you like, forerunners to British standards. They're produced by BSI. Don't let the publicly available specification bit fool you. They do still charge for these. I suppose the only good news I should put my marketing hat on here. Those of you who are CABE members will recently seen some stuff in the journal and on our website about member benefits. One of those member benefits is about discounted access to British standards. So see more on our website for that. Sorry about the quick advert in the middle there. Okay, and then I think there's an element of, you know, if we're going to use 9999, we know we're looking at flexibility, we're looking appropriate. What we're still trying to achieve is a base level of compliance. Now, I've put the means of escape regulation on the screen, but obviously it's all of Part B that we have to comply with. So we're looking at a level of compliance. And I think there are two fundamental questions that I would ask at this point. The first one being, if we're using an ADB approach, should we allow some flexibility from that ADB? So if somebody says to me, can I have a longer travel distance if I put some extra detection in? Is that a bit of flexibility under ADB, or actually are we veering into mixing and matching 9999 and approved document B? And then I think that the final thought that I want to wrap this up with is both of these standards and a fire engineered approach aim to give us a level of fire safety. But unfortunately in this sector, and particularly if we follow ADB, what we seem to aim for nowadays is the minimum level of safety we have to provide to meet the regulatory standard. So particularly if we're designing to these standards just to meet building regulations, there's an element of you aim for something, if you're lucky you achieve it, if you fail you've got something that doesn't meet the standard. So ADB is all about meeting that minimum standard. It may well be, if we decide to adopt BS9999, we can aim for something higher. And perhaps from the designer's point of view and from the client's point of view, we should try and persuade people not to aim to achieve the minimum, but to aim to achieve something slightly better. And that, I think, is where I'm probably going to hang up what I'm going to say and go back and look at any of the questions. So, Katie, I don't know if you've picked up on any questions that I haven't.
Yes, hi Kevin, hi everyone. Just a couple that have just come in. In fact, they are coming in as we speak now. So, for example, is BS9999 also an alternative for ADB 2, 3, 4 and 5, or just B1, for example?
No. BS9999 is the alternative to all of the regulations that cover fire safety in the building regulations, so B1, 2, 3, and 3, 4, and 5. Now it does in part make reference back, but generally you use either the suite of ADB to cover all of those elements, or BS9999. So you can't just use BS99 for means of escape and then use ADB for B2, 3, 4, 5. It has to be a total replacement for the whole thing. Okay, right, there's one there. Why are there different standards? Wouldn't one all-encompassing standard that's worked through in some kind of critical path be easier to follow and achieve a more consistent standard across all buildings? I think you're absolutely right in what you're saying there, Ian. To have one standard that everybody uses might be more effective. I think the issue is, though, that there is room for an ADB approach because it's intended to be something for straightforward, simple buildings that's used for relatively simplistic work, but we need a more complicated standard. And I think 9999 is sort of bridging that gap between a very simplistic one-size-fits-all type approach and the far more complex fire engineered site solution. I think where it perhaps, where we have an issue is that ADB is written with the end user in mind and is simplistic so that designers, builders, clients can pick it up and understand what should be needed. Everybody appreciates that fire engineering should really be carried out by a qualified fire engineer. Where I think there's some confusion and doubt is who's capable of using BS9999. Is it every designer out there? Can you read it and understand it from that point of view? Or do you need a degree of specialist training to be able to do it? Right. Should the onus be placed on the designers to state which standard is being adopted? Absolutely. It's a fundamental principle that when a submission is made to building control to be assessed, it's not building control who determine which standard they check it against. It is the designer who says, I have designed this to ADB or 9999, or to a fire engine solution. So the designer is the one who determines which standard it's checked against. When designing under 99, is it advisable to have the client's buy-in in terms of management and the like? Yes, I think it is much easier if you have got the client on board with what you're going to do, what you're designing, so that they appreciate very early on what it means in terms of how they're going to run and operate their building. Okay. Right. Okay. Fine. I'm looking for other questions. I'm not sure there are too many more. I know there was a comment rather than a question earlier on. Somebody asked, do you know of any day courses on Fire and ADB Volume 1? Again, I probably shouldn't do another marketing and advertising spiel. We don't do a one-day course on ADB. What we do is we do a much longer course on all of the building regulations, which is a 6-day course. But people can book individual days of that, and day 3 is about B1 and looks at means of escape, and it looks at ADB, and it does look a bit at 9999, and day 4 covers all of the rest of part B. It also deals with one of the other approved documents on that day as well, but between those 2 days it covers all of part B. So if you want to have a look at our website for that, I do happen to know because we run that on a sort of a 3 days, then a month's break, then a 3 days. We're actually in the middle of the first 3 days this week, so the means of escape day is tomorrow. But have a look at our website, have a look and see if that would be of interest to you. I seem to be doing an awful lot of adverts today. Okay, right. What was the travel distance for BS9999 B3 2-direction? The slide showed 16 meters. Off the top of my head, I believe it's 40 meters. I'm fairly confident in that, but check in the actual document if you need to. I will always tend to say I can try and remember everything, but there's so much out there now you probably need to look it up. But I think it's 16 meters single direction, 40 meters double direction as a starting point. But obviously the concept of 9999 is that if you put the right detection alarm warning system in, get people motivated, then you can maybe increase those by 15%. If you then put in tall or have taller ceilings, you can then increase again by a percentage depending on how high the ceiling is. So what you do find in 9999 is your starting point, and then you will be able to apply various factors to increase those distances up to another table in the standard, which gives you the maximum they can actually get to. And I think the maximum travel distance in any building in 9999 to the nearest exit goes up to 90 meters if you apply all of the possible variations in a particularly high ceiling. Okay, under 9999, can you consider the escape distance along staircases with a travel distance? Well, ordinarily with most buildings, once you get to a staircase enclosure, you're in a protected bit of structure. Your distance tends to work to the staircase rather than all the way down. But obviously for small premises, it might be you take the distance all the way to the exit. When will BS9999 be released? Well, the original release date was August, September. I spoke to their head of construction standards a couple of weeks ago, and he has promised me that it will be out this year, although it will be the tail end of the year, so it probably makes a good item to put on your letter to Father Christmas as something you would like. Okay, I think that's covered most of the questions, unless you've got anything else there, Katie, that you've picked up on.
No, I think, to be fair, you've pretty much picked up on everything, because there were quite a few questions coming in that were all along a similar theme. So yeah, I believe that will be pretty much covered off.
Great. Okay, well, I'll leave it to you to wrap up then, Katie.
Okay, well, thank you for your time, Kevin, and for your expertise yet again. And thank you to everybody for joining us. We hope you found the session enjoyable and also informative. As you may know, we do run webinars once a month on a Wednesday morning at 8 AM. The next one that we've got scheduled in is on the 16th of November, and that's the week after our annual conference. Our conference is this year, the theme is Aiming for Excellence. So our next webinar will continue this theme, and we'll be looking at aiming for excellence in workmanship and product selection. So if you'd like to join us, pop onto our website, into the events section and search for webinars. You'll see all the next webinars. I think we're planned right through to July. So if there's any there, including next month, that do take your fancy, sign up and then join us on those Wednesday mornings. So again, thank you very much for your time. Hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time. Thank you.